The coolant pipe exploded at exactly 14:32 ship time, and everything after that moment became a nightmare. Ressa was updating medical inventory when the alarm screamed through the ship. Red lights flooded every corridor. She dropped her datapad and ran toward the secondary engine room, her four eyes adjusting to the emergency lighting as her thin blue legs carried her through the narrow passages of the Wandering Heron. She found the crew already gathered outside the sealed door. Captain Luris stood at the front, his pale face tight with fear. Beside him, Hob the Grinthery engineer was pulling on heat-resistant gloves, his stone-like skin already showing cracks from the temperature bleeding through the walls. "What happened?" Ressa asked. "Coolant failure," Pip answered. The small fox-like Fenari was shaking, his fur standing on end. "The backup reactor is overheating. If someone does not reach the manual override in the next 11 minutes, the core will breach." Ressa looked at the temperature reading on the wall panel. Her stomach dropped. 900 degrees, she whispered. "That is not possible. Nothing survives that." "I can try," Hobbs said. His voice was rough, determined. The Grinthery were known across the galaxy for their heat resistance. They worked in forges and volcanic mining operations. If anyone could survive this, it was him. Captain Luris nodded. "Be careful." Hob opened the outer airlock and stepped into the buffer zone. The inner door was already glowing orange at the edges. He took 3 steps forward, then 4, then 5. Step 7. He collapsed. Point 2 crew members dragged him back. His stone skin was cracked and bleeding, steam rising from his body. Ressa rushed to help, scanning him with her medical device. "He will live," she said, "but he cannot go back." His internal temperature almost reached critical. Captain Luris stared at the sealed door. "Then we have no options. We abandon ship and hope the escape pods clear the blast radius." "How long do we have?" Pip asked, his voice breaking. 9 minutes. Ressa felt tears forming in her eyes. The medical supplies they were carrying would have saved thousands of lives on the colony world. Now, they would burn with the ship, and the crew might burn with them. That a voice came from behind the group. "I can do it." Everyone turned. Danny Reyes stood in the corridor, still wearing his work coveralls. The human engineer was not a large man. He was average height, average build, with brown skin and dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples. He had been with the crew for 2 years, and Ressa realized she knew almost nothing about him. He was quiet. He did his job. He never complained. "Danny, no," Captain Luris said. "The temperature is beyond anything I know." Danny was already removing his gloves. He set them carefully on a supply crate. Then he removed his jacket, folding it neatly beside the gloves. Ressa stepped forward. "You do not understand. 900 degrees will kill you instantly. Your species cannot. I need everyone to move back from the door," Danny said. His voice was calm, too calm, and "I need someone to tell me exactly where the manual override lever is located." 40 feet inside, on the left wall of the core housing, Hob rasped from the floor. "But human, you cannot. I am built for heat. You are soft. You will die before you take 10 steps. Danny looked down at Hob with an expression Ressa could not read. "Maybe," he said, "but the ship needs someone to try." He walked to the airlock door and placed his bare hand on the controls. "Danny," Captain Luris moved toward him. "I'm ordering you to stop. I will not watch a crew member commit suicide." Danny turned and met the captain's 4 eyes with his own 2. "Captain, I respect you, but I'm going through that door. You can either tell me exactly what I need to do inside, or I can figure out myself. One of those options gives us a better chance." Silence filled the corridor. The alarm continued to scream. The temperature reading climbed to 920 degrees. Finally, Hobbs spoke from the floor. "The lever is jammed. The heat warped the housing. You will need to remove the core manually and carry it to the emergency ejection chute on the far wall." "How heavy is the core?" 70 kilos, but will be glowing white. "If you touch it, your hands will, I understand." Danny turned back to the door. "Everyone clear this section. If I fail, you need to reach the escape pods." No one moved. "Go," Danny said. "That is not a request." Captain Luris began herding the crew back. Ressa stayed, pressing herself against the wall, unable to leave. She watched through the small viewport as Danny cycled open the airlock. Heat blasted into the corridor. Even from 20 feet away, Ressa felt her skin tighten and burn. She watched Danny step forward into the buffer zone, then reach for the inner door as he opened it. The wave of heat that escaped was visible, distorting the air like water. Danny walked into it without hesitation. Through the viewport, Ressa saw his skin immediately redden, then blister, then begin to char. He kept walking. She wanted to scream. She wanted to look away, but she could not move. She watched the human engineer walk through temperatures that should have killed him in the first second, and somehow, impossibly, he kept moving forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps that he did not stop. Ressa could not breathe. Her lungs had forgotten how to work. Every part of her medical training screamed that what she was seeing was impossible, yet her 4 eyes refused to look away from the viewport. Danny was still walking. His skin had gone past red, past blistered. It was blackening now, cracking like dried earth in a drought. She could see the exposed flesh beneath, and even that was cooking in the terrible heat. The temperature inside that room was 940 degrees. Nothing lived at 940 degrees. Nothing. But Danny kept moving. His steps were slow and deliberate. Each one seemed to cost him tremendous effort. She watched his jaw clench, the muscles in his neck standing out like cables. He was in pain, unimaginable pain, and still he walked. Behind her, she heard Pip crying softly. Hob had pulled himself to a sitting position against the wall, watching with an expression of pure disbelief. Captain Lewis stood frozen, his 4 eyes wide, his pale blue skin gone nearly white. 20 feet. Danny was halfway there. Smoke was rising from his body now. His coveralls had burned away in patches, leaving charred fabric clinging to cooked skin. Ressa saw him stumble, catch himself, and continue. His right arm hung at a strange angle, the joints swelling from the heat. She pressed her hand to the viewport. The glass was hot enough to burn her palm, but she did not care. "Please," she whispered. "Please, please, please." Danny reached the core housing. The manual override lever was exactly where Hob had said it would be. Danny grabbed it with both hands and pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled again, throwing his entire body weight against it. The metal groaned, but did not move. "It is jammed," Ressa said. Hob said it was jammed. "He cannot." Danny released the lever. For one terrible moment, Ressa thought he had given up. Then he turned to face the core itself. It was a sphere the size of a human head, glowing white-hot in its housing. The temperature at its surface had to be over 1,000 degrees. Maybe 1,200. Maybe more. Looking at it hurt Ressa's eyes even through the viewport. Danny reached into the housing with both hands. Ressa screamed. She could not help it. The sound tore from her throat as she watched his fingers close around that impossible ball of heat. She saw his hands turn black instantly, the flesh searing to the bone. She saw him lift the core from its housing, cradling it against his chest like something precious. He began walking toward the emergency ejection chute. His steps were slower now. He was staggering, weaving, his body failing around him. But he did not drop the core. He held it tight against his ruined chest and walked, step by agonizing step, across the remaining distance, 0.15 feet, 0.10 feet, 0.5 feet, that he reached the ejection chute, and his hands, or what was left of them, fumbled with the release mechanism. Ressa saw his fingers leaving behind skin on the metal, saw the bones of his knuckles exposed and blackening. He pulled the lever. The chute opened. Danny dropped the core inside and slammed the release. Through a secondary viewport, Ressa watched the glowing sphere shoot into the void of space. The temperature readings on the wall panel immediately began dropping. 900 degrees, 850, 800. Danny turned toward the door. He took 1 step and collapsed. Ressa did not remember opening the airlock. She did not remember running through the buffer zone, did not feel the heat that was still well over 500 degrees. She remembered only reaching Danny's body, falling to her knees beside him, pressing her medical scanner to his chest. He was alive. The readings made no sense. His heart was still beating. His brain showed activity. His lungs were working, pulling in air that should have scorched them to ash. By every standard of galactic medicine, By every law of biology she had ever learned, Danny should have been dead before he took his third step into that room. But he was alive. His eyes opened. They were bloodshot, the whites yellowed from heat damage, but they focused on her face. His cracked, bleeding lips moved. "Reactor safe?" he whispered. Ressa could not answer. She was crying too hard. Tears streamed down her blue face as she ran her scanner over his body, documenting injuries that no living creature should have survived. Third-degree burns covered 90% of his body. His hands were destroyed, the bones visible through carbonized tissue. His internal temperature had reached 108 degrees, a number that would have meant instant death for a Theshan. And he was asking about the reactor. "Safe," she finally managed to say. "The reactor is safe. You saved us." Danny closed his eyes. "Good," he breathed. "That is good." Then he lost consciousness, and Ressa screamed for help that was already running toward them. Captain Luris and two other crew members helped carry Danny to the medical bay. Ressa worked frantically, applying every burn treatment she had, injecting fluids and pain medications and cellular regeneration compounds. Her hands would not stop shaking. Pip appeared in the doorway, his small face wet with tears. "Is he going to live?" Ressa did not know how to answer. By all medical knowledge, he should already be dead. He should have died in the first second. The fact that he was still breathing, still showing brain activity, still existing seemed like a violation of natural law. "I do not know," she admitted. "I do not understand what he is." She looked down at the human on her table, at his blackened hands and blistered face, at the rise and fall of his damaged chest. What was he? What were any of them? Ressa had not slept in 36 hours. Her eyes burned and her muscles ached, but she could not bring herself to leave the medical bay. Every few minutes, she checked Danny's vital signs again, expecting them to finally show what they should have shown from the beginning. But they never did. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. His brain kept functioning. And most disturbing of all, his body had begun to heal. She noticed it first in the minor burns on his legs. The raw, weeping tissue was slowly closing, new pink skin forming at the edges of the wounds. His temperature had dropped from 108 to 102, still dangerously high for any species she knew, but moving in the right direction. "That is not possible," she said to herself for perhaps the 100th time. Captain Luris appeared in the doorway. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "How is he?" "He is healing." The words sounded absurd coming out of her mouth. "His body is actually repairing itself. I have never seen anything like this." The captain walked to Danny's bedside and looked down at the unconscious human. "I have been reviewing his personnel file. He listed no special medical conditions. No infants genetics. Nothing that would explain this." What did he list under species classification? Human. Standard baseline human. Ressa pulled up the Galactic medical database on her console and searched for the human entry. The file was surprisingly short. Basic anatomy, standard vital ranges, a few notes about dietary requirements. At the bottom, almost like an afterthought, was a single notation. Species originated from Class 12 Deathworld. Full biological capabilities not yet cataloged. Class 12, she read aloud. That is the highest danger classification for inhabited planets. Captain Luris leaned over her shoulder. "I knew Earth was considered harsh, but I never thought much about it." Danny never mentioned anything, because perhaps to him, there is nothing to mention. Ressa pulled up more data, searching through academic papers and research notes. Most of it was theoretical. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for a few decades, and they were not widely studied. They were considered a minor species, unremarkable except for their stubbornness and their willingness to take dangerous jobs. She found a contact buried in a xenobiology journal. Dr. Kells, a researcher at the Centrum Science Institute who specialized in Deathworld species. She sent a message and received a response within minutes. The researcher's face appeared on her screen. She was a Fenari like Pip, with large ears and bright, intelligent eyes. "You have a human on your ship? And he survived exposure to 900 degrees. "Yes. I'm watching his body regenerate right now." Dr. Kells leaned forward. "Tell me everything." Ressa described what had happened. The coolant failure, Hobbs' collapse, Danny's decision to enter the room. The walk through temperatures that exceeded 1,000 degrees. The moment he grabbed the core with his bare hands, Dr. Kells listened without interruption. When Ressa finished, the researcher was quiet for a long moment. "I am not surprised," she finally said. "You're not surprised? How can you not be surprised?" "Because humans evolved in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Their planet has extreme temperature ranges, constant radiation exposure, an atmosphere filled with oxygen, which is literally corrosive. They developed resistance to heat, to cold, to pressure changes. Their bodies produce natural pain suppressors that allow them to function through injuries that would incapacitate any other species." Ressa looked at Danny's unconscious form. "But 900 degrees is extreme even for them. But humans have a biological mechanism that other species lack. Under extreme stress, they can push their bodies far beyond normal limits. Their adrenaline, their pain tolerance, their sheer determination can keep them moving when they should be dead. They call it many things: survival instinct, fight or flight response, stubbornness." Dr. Kells paused. "I call it terrifying. Why does no one know about this?" "Because humans do not tell anyone. They do not consider themselves remarkable. To them, surviving hardship is simply what living things do. They do not understand that other species cannot do what they do." The researcher's ears flattened against her head. "Your human walked through fire and grabbed a star with his hands. And when he wakes up, he will probably apologize for causing a fuss." After the call ended, Ressa sat in silence for a long time. She looked at Danny, at his bandaged hands and healing skin, at the slow, steady rhythm of his heart monitor. He had been with the crew for 2 years. He had done dozens of dangerous repairs, volunteered for every risky assignment, worked double shifts without complaint. She had always thought he was simply a good worker dedicated to his job. Now she understood. He had been protecting them all along. Every task he took was a task he was keeping away from crew members who could not survive it. And he had never said a word. The medical bay door opened. Hobb stood there, his stone skin still showing cracks from his own burns. He walked slowly to Danny's bed and lowered himself into the chair beside it. "I have been a fool," the Grinthari said quietly. "I thought I was a strong one. I thought the human was soft." "We all thought that," Ressa replied. Hobb reached out and placed one heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. "He walked where I could not walk. He carried what I could not carry. And he did it without hesitation." They sat together in the quiet medical bay, watching the impossible humans sleep, and wondered what else they did not know about the species from the class 12 Deathworld called Earth. Danny dreamed of fire. He was 8 years old again, standing in the backyard of his grandmother's house in Arizona. The summer heat pressed down on everything like a physical weight, turning the air into something thick and hard to breathe. His grandmother sat on the porch, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. "Your grandfather worked in heat worse than this," she told him. "Factory furnaces, 12-hour shifts, no air conditioning, no breaks. Just him and the metal and the fire." Young Danny wiped sweat from his face. Was he scared? Every day. But fear does not stop work from needing to be done. She smiled at him, her face wrinkled by decades of sun. "We come from strong people, Mijo. People who survive. Remember that." The dream shifted. He was 23, working construction with his father in Nevada. The desert stretched around them, endless and unforgiving. A scaffolding collapsed on the 3rd floor of a half-finished building, trapping 2 workers under twisted metal. Danny did not think. He climbed into the wreckage while others were still shouting for help. The metal was hot from sitting in the sun, hot enough to burn through his gloves, but he kept lifting, kept pulling, until both men were free. Later, in the hospital, a doctor told him he had 2nd-degree burns on his arms and a cracked rib from the weight he had carried. "You should not have been able to do that," the doctor said. "A normal person would have stopped." Danny did not understand what that meant. The men needed help. He could move. So he moved. The dream shifted again. He was 30, working a chemical plant in Texas. A fire broke out in one of the processing units, and Danny found himself carrying unconscious coworkers through flames and smoke, one over each shoulder. He spent 3 months in a burn ward after that, his skin grafted and regrown, his lungs scarred but functional. The company gave him a medal. His co-workers called him a hero. Danny just wanted to go back to work. "Why do you keep doing this?" his sister asked him once. "You're going to get yourself killed." He thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Because someone has to. And if I can, then it should be me." She did not understand. Nobody ever did. In the medical bay of the Wandering Heron, Danny's eyes opened. The first thing he saw was white ceiling panels. The second thing he saw was Ressa, asleep in a chair beside his bed, her thin blue arms wrapped around herself. The third thing he noticed was the pain. It was everywhere. Every inch of his body screamed with it. His hands felt like they had been dipped in acid and set on fire. His chest ached with each breath. But beneath the pain, he could feel something else. The slow, steady process of healing that his body had always done, the cells knitting themselves back together, the damage slowly repairing. He tried to sit up and failed. His muscles would not cooperate. He tried again and managed to raise himself a few inches before collapsing back to the bed. The movement woke Ressa. Her 4 eyes blinked open and then went wide when she saw him watching her. "You are awake." Her voice cracked. "How are you awake? You should be in a coma for weeks." "How long was I out?" His voice was rough, his throat raw. 72 hours. She grabbed her scanner and began running it over his body. "Your cellular regeneration rate is extraordinary. The burns on your legs have nearly closed. Your internal organs are showing signs of repair. Your hands—" She stopped. Danny lifted his hands in front of his face. They were wrapped in thick bandages, but he could see the shape of them, could feel his fingers moving beneath the wrappings. That was good. That meant they were still there. "Your hands are regrowing tissue," Ressa said. The bones were exposed. I could see them through the carbonized flesh. "And now there is new muscle forming. New skin. How is this possible?" Danny lowered his hands. "The body heals. That is what it does. Not like this. Not this fast. Not from this much damage." Ressa set down her scanner and stared at him. "You walked through 900 degrees. You held a reactor core that was over 1,000 degrees. Any other species would have died instantly. Why did you not tell us what humans could do?" Danny frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean your species is from a class, 12 Deathworld. I mean you have biological capabilities that exceed anything in the galactic database. I mean you survived something impossible and you're acting like it was just another day at work. It was." Danny genuinely did not understand her confusion. "The ship needed someone to fix the problem. I could move. So I moved." Ressa made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "That is what Dr. Kell said you would say. She said you would not understand why we are amazed." "Who is Dr. Kells?" "A researcher who studies Deathworld species. I contacted her while you were unconscious. She explained some things about humans that I did not know." Ressa sat down heavily in her chair. "She said your species evolved in conditions that would be considered torture for most galactic life. She said you can push your bodies beyond any reasonable limit and keep functioning. She said you do not even realize you are doing anything special." Danny was quiet for a moment. He thought about his grandmother, his father, the workers he had carried out of that burning plant. He thought about all the things his species called just surviving. "I suppose we do not talk about it much," he finally said. "It is just how we are." Ressa's 4 eyes glistened with tears. "You almost died saving us. And you think it is nothing." Danny looked at her, at this alien woman who had clearly not slept in days, who had stayed by his bed while he healed. He did not know what to say to make her feel better. He had never been good with words. "It is not nothing," he said slowly. "The ship is safe. The crew is safe. That is something. That is everything." Ressa wiped her eyes and did not respond. But she reached out and took his bandaged hand gently in her thin blue fingers, and they sat together in silence until Captain Lewis came to check on them both. 1 week after the incident, Danny tried to return to work. Ressa found him in the engine room, attempting to run diagnostics with hands that were still wrapped in bandages. "What are you doing?" She stood in the doorway, her 4 eyes wide with disbelief. "Checking the secondary systems." Danny did not look up from the console. "The coolant failure might have damaged other components. You cannot work. You are still recovering." "I am fine." Your hands are not fully healed. Your body is still regenerating internal tissue. You have not been cleared for duty. Ressa walked over and stood directly in front of him. Why are you doing this? Danny finally met her eyes. Because there is work to do. The work can wait. Hob has been handling repairs. Hob should be resting too. His burns were severe. His burns were nothing compared to yours. Ressa reached out and gently took his wrists, lifting his bandaged hands. Danny, please, let yourself heal. Something in her voice made him stop. He looked at her properly for the first time, saw the exhaustion in her face, the worry in her 4 eyes. He realized she had been checking on him every few hours since he woke up, that she had barely left his side for the entire week. I am sorry, he said quietly. I did not know how to not work. You could try resting. You could try letting other people take care of things for once. She lowered his hands, but did not release them. You scared me. You scared all of us. We watched you burn, and we thought you were dead. I was not dead. You should have been. Her voice broke slightly. I'm a medical officer. I know what is possible and what is not. What you did should not have been possible. Danny did not know how to respond to that. His entire life, he had simply done what needed to be done. He had never thought of himself as exceptional. He had never considered that others might find his actions frightening or confusing. I will go back to the medical bay, he said finally. But can you do me a favor? What? Stop looking at me like I'm going to disappear. Ressa laughed. It was a small, wet sound, half sob and half relief. I will try. Over the next few days, the crew came to visit him one by one. Pip arrived first, the small Finari clutching a ration pack like an offering. I brought you food, he said, placing it on the bedside table. I did not know what humans like to eat. Thank you, Pip. The communications officer stood there awkwardly for a moment. I wanted to say thank you for what you did. I have a family on the colony world. If the supplies had not arrived, he stopped, unable to finish. The supplies will get there, Danny said. That is what matters. Pip nodded quickly and left, his tail tucked between his legs. Captain Luris came next. He sat in the chair beside Danny's bed and did not speak for a long time. I have filed my report with the shipping company, he finally said. I described what happened. What you did. Was that necessary? Yes. The captain turned to look at him. Danny, I have been commanding ships for 30 years. I have seen crew members die in accidents. I have seen brave people make difficult choices. But I have never seen anything like what you did. I just fixed a problem. You walked through fire and held a dying sun in your hands. Captain Luris shook his head. That is not just fixing a problem. That is something else entirely. What is it then? The captain was quiet for a moment. I do not know. I do not have a word for it. But I am honored to have you on my crew. Hob came last. The Grinthery engineer stood in the doorway for several minutes before entering, his stone face unreadable. I owe you an apology, he said. Danny frowned. For what? For thinking you were fragile. For assuming I was the strong one because of my species. Hob walked to the bed and lowered himself into the chair with visible effort. His own burns were still healing, the cracks in his stone skin slowly filling in. I have worked with many species. I have always believed the Grinthery were the most durable. You have shown me otherwise. You collapsed at 600 degrees. I collapsed at 900. We both did what we could, but you kept going. After your skin burned, after your hands, Hob stopped, swallowing hard. I could not have done that. I would have given up. Danny thought about his grandmother again, about all the stories she had told him of people surviving impossible things. Humans learn early that pain does not mean you have to stop. Sometimes you keep going because stopping is not an option. How do you learn that? By growing up in a world that tries to kill you every day. By watching the people before you survive and knowing you have to survive too. Danny looked at his healing hands. Earth is not kind to weakness. It teaches us to endure. Hob nodded slowly. The death world. Yes, I suppose so. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two engineers who had both walked in a fire, one who had fallen and one who had kept walking. There was no competition between them, no comparison, just shared understanding of what it meant to put the ship first. Before Hob left, he placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. When you are healed, he said, I would like to work beside you again. Danny smiled. It hurt his face, pulled at the healing skin, but he smiled anyway. I would like that too. 3 weeks after Danny grabbed a dying reactor core with his bare hands, the wandering heron docked at Port Celeste. News had traveled faster than the ship. By the time they arrived, the story of the human who held a star had spread across the station. Crowds gathered at the docking bay, hoping to catch a glimpse of the impossible engineer. Danny hated it. I do not understand, he said to Ressa as they prepared to disembark. I just fixed a problem. Why does everyone care? Because you did something no one else could do. Ressa adjusted the light bandages still wrapped around his hands. The skin beneath was pink and new, covered in scars but functional. You gave them hope. You showed them that survival is possible even when everything says it is not. That is too much meaning for one engine repair. Ressa smiled. Maybe, but that is how stories work. They walked off the ship together. The crowd pressed forward, calling out questions, reaching with hands and tentacles and appendages. Danny kept his head down and moved through them as quickly as possible, following Captain Luris to the station's administrative offices. Representatives from 6 different species were waiting for them. They wanted Danny for research programs, security teams, military operations. They offered money, status, positions of power. Danny declined them all. Why? One representative demanded. Do you not understand what you could become? The influence you could have? I am an engineer, Danny said simply. I fix things. That is all I want to do. The representative could not comprehend it. Neither could the others. They left confused and frustrated, unable to understand why someone with such abilities would choose to remain ordinary. Later, at a tavern near the docks, the crew of the Wandering Heron shared drinks and watched the station's news feed. A report was playing about the incident, complete with footage from the ship's internal cameras. Danny had never seen the footage before. None of them had. They watched in silence as a human figure walked into a room filled with white heat. They watched his skin blacken and his clothes burn away. They watched him reach into the core housing and lift out a sphere of impossible fire. They watched him carry it across the room, step by staggering step, and drop it into the ejection chute that on the screen, Danny collapsed. The footage ended, and O1 at the table spoke for a long time. I look like a monster, Danny finally said. You look like a hero, Pip replied quietly. There is no difference. Both are things people are afraid of. Hob placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. Perhaps, but one saves lives. The other takes them. You're the first kind. The news feed switched to a lecture hall somewhere on the station. A professor was showing the same footage to a room full of students. For centuries, we wondered why humans spread so quickly through the galaxy, the professor said. Why they take jobs others refuse. Why they survive where others perish. We call them reckless. We call them foolish. We were wrong. The footage played again. The students watched with expressions of horror and fascination. They are not reckless. They simply have a different definition of survivable. What kills us merely hurts them. What destroys us merely slows them down. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every moment of every day, and they survived. They are still surviving. The professor paused the footage at the moment Danny grabbed the core. This is not madness. This is not stupidity. This is what 4 billion years of Deathworld evolution looks like. This is humanity. Danny turned away from the screen. Can we leave? I do not want to watch this anymore. The crew finished their drinks and walked back to the ship. The Wandering Heron was scheduled to depart in the morning, carrying another load of supplies to another distant world. Life would return to normal. Danny would go back to being an ordinary engineer on an ordinary freighter. But Ressa knew nothing would ever be quite the same. Before they boarded, Captain Luris stopped Danny at the foot of the ramp. I have received over 200 applications from humans wanting to join our crew, he said. It seems your story has inspired them. Danny frowned. I do not want to inspire anyone. Too late. The captain smiled. I was thinking we might hire a few of them. Update the crew manual to include some information about human capabilities. Perhaps add a section about what your species considers a normal emergency. That might be useful, Danny admitted. They boarded the ship. Danny went straight to the engine room, where Hob was already running pre-flight diagnostics. The two engineers worked side by side, checking systems and calibrating sensors, falling into the comfortable rhythm they had shared before everything changed. Does it still hurt? Hob asked after a while. Danny looked at his scarred hands. The pink skin was sensitive, the nerves still healing. Every movement sent small sparks of pain through his fingers. Yes, he admitted, but it is getting better. How do you keep working? Danny thought about the question. He thought about his grandmother, his father, all the humans who had survived impossible things and called it ordinary. He thought about the crew of the Wandering Heron, who had become something like family over the past 2 years. He thought about the cargo they carried, the lives it would save, the work that always needed to be done. Pain means I'm still alive, he finally said. And there is always work to do. Hob nodded slowly. He did not fully understand, but he was beginning to. The Wandering Heron departed Port Celeste as the station's artificial sun began its evening cycle. In the medical bay, Ressa updated Danny's personnel file. She deleted the word none from his medical history and typed something new. Survived direct exposure to 900+ degree environment. Full recovery achieved. Human baseline response. She paused, considering. Then she added a personal note at the bottom. Recommend future vessels with human crew members receive updated safety briefings. Not to protect the humans, but to prepare everyone else for what humans consider ordinary. She saved the file and looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past. Somewhere out there, the story of Danny Reyes was spreading. Somewhere out there, other humans were hearing about what he had done and nodding to themselves, unsurprised, because that was simply what humans did. They survived, they endured, and when the work needed to be done, they did it without hesitation, regardless of the cost. Ressa smiled and went to find her crewmates. There was a long journey ahead, and she wanted to spend it with the people who had become her family, including the impossible human who still did not understand why anyone found him remarkable.